A constructor is a block of code that initializes a newly created object. A class contains constructors that are invoked to create objects from the class's blueprint. Constructor declarations look similar to method declarations, except that they use the name of the class, so a constructor will have the exact same name as its class name, and constructors have no return type. So to understand the inner workings of a constructor, we looked at a previous example of a person class that had a constructor, and we'll be looking at another example of constructors shortly. This brings us to one of the key pillars of object-oriented programming, encapsulation. So encapsulation is a mechanism of wrapping data or the variables and the code acting on these data, which are the methods, together as a single unit within a class. So when dealing with encapsulation, access specifiers or access level modifiers are what determine whether other classes can use a particular field or invoke a particular method or behavior in another class. And there are two levels of access control. So at the top level, we have the public or package private specifier, and this is with no explicit modifier. And at the member level, we have the public, private, protected access specifiers, or package private with no explicit modifier. In the table below, we have the modifiers along with the class, package, subclass, and the world access to these types of data. Now with the public, you can see that there is access to everyone, right, at the class level and to everyone using the program. And this is not really convenient because when we're dealing with sensitive data within classes, we do not want everybody to be able to access that data. So which is why we specify data as private. Now with the protected level specifier, this is acceptable only to classes that are inheriting from your base class. And this is another pillar of object-oriented programming called inheritance. So when a class inherits directly from a parent or base class, then it will have access to all the protected data members. With the private access specifier, yes, we have access to those data at the class level, but no access to any subclasses or the package level or to anywhere else in the program. In order to manipulate our variables if they are private or protected, we need what is known as accessors and mutators. Now the accessor methods return the value of a private variable, and it also gives other classes access to that value that is stored in that variable without them having any direct access to the variable itself. Mutator methods can modify or reset the value of a private variable, and it also gives other classes access to that value stored in that variable without directly having access to that variable itself. So in short, our accessors and mutators are more commonly known as our getters and setters that allow us to return values of variables and also to set or modify or reset the values of these private variables. In this example, we'll be looking at a date class that has a constructor. It has private access specifiers, day, month, and year that are all private. It has a default constructor, and it's a default constructor because it has 0 parameters. And inside the constructor, I'm initializing day, month, and year to 0. And it has a print date function that simply prints the date, day, month, and year format. So inside my main method, I'm going to create an object from our date class, and I'm going to call this object date and set it equal to a new date. Now when I call my date object and hit dot, I now have access to the print date function. And when we run this program, it compiles and runs, and we see that it has the values that we set in the default constructor. So all of the values are 0. Now I'm going to define another constructor and override the default constructor. So overriding a constructor or overriding a method is simply creating another instance of that constructor, in this case date. You will realize that it has the same name because constructors have to have the same exact name as the class. So we specify a public date along with 3 parameters for day, month, and year. And of course, this is known as a parameterized constructor. So what these parameters allow us to do is that it allows us to enter arguments into our constructor or values. And in this case, I'm passing in a day, month, and year variable and setting it equal to the current instance of the class, day, month, and year properties. Now that I have defined a parameterized constructor, I can now pass in day, month, and year values as arguments into the object's constructor. So I'm going to pass in 20 as the date, the first, and the year is 2022. And when we run our program, we see we get back our date that we have entered into our constructor. I'm now going to overload the date constructor a 3rd time. So you can overload constructors or methods as many times as needed. And by overloading, we simply mean defining a constructor with the same name, but in this case, different parameters than the previous constructors. And overloading can occur as many times as needed. It just depends on the specific use case or scenario that you are working on. So you may see classes with several overloaded constructors, each serving a different purpose. And also you may see a class with several overloaded methods, each one doing a different thing, but at the same time having the same name. In this overloaded constructor, I am passing in an additional parameter, a string for holiday, and inside the constructor body, I am using the this keyword, and in the parameters, I am simply putting the day, month, and year, and we've added an additional parameter called holiday. So we'll need to create this data member or property inside our class, and now we can set our holiday equal to whatever holiday that current date is. And I am going to modify my getter function, which is the print date function or accessor method, to also include holiday. Back inside my main method in my main.java file, I will now change the date to a well-known holiday and also add the name of that holiday as a parameter or argument in this case to the constructor. So the 5th of May is known as Cinco de Mayo. So I'll be using that as the holiday. And I'll also create a second date object. And this time I'll call it holiday and set it equal to Christmas. So Christmas is the 25th of the 12th month, December. And we just simply enter Christmas as the string value for our holiday. So I can call holiday.printDate, and when we run our program, we see both our dates and the corresponding holiday for that date.